nothing is worth losing your peace. He yelled at a man and watched his own daughter fall into depression and nearly die. Only then did he realize the anger he thought was justified was the beginning of his greatest karmic downfall. Marcus Lin was a man who had conquered everything except himself. Once poor, ridiculed, and underestimated, Marcus had built an empire from nothing. People called him a self-made millionaire, a titan of the industry. But behind the applause and polished suits was a man whose greatest fear was being disrespected. He lived by one silent rule: no one embarrasses me and walks away unscathed. He believed this mindset made him powerful. In truth, it made him a prisoner. One evening, Marcus attended a high-profile gala at the Grand Orchid Hotel. The room sparkled with crystal chandeliers and clinking champagne glasses. It was a night of celebration, of praise, until a simple accident changed everything. A young staff member, nervous and overworked, accidentally spilled a glass of red wine on Marcus's pristine white shirt. The room fell silent. Marcus's expression darkened. He stood slowly, towering over the trembling man, and in front of dozens of guests he exploded. "You incompetent fool!" he shouted. "You think this is acceptable? You've just cost me more than your entire salary." The man, named Jonah, stammered an apology, but it didn't matter. Marcus fired him on the spot, publicly, brutally, without a second thought. What Marcus didn't know, what he didn't care to know, was that Jonah was working double shifts to pay for his daughter's leukemia treatment. That night, he not only lost his job, he lost the last financial support keeping his little girl in care. Jonah left the gala not just humiliated but hopeless. Karma, though silent, was already moving. Marcus, of course, didn't think twice. He laughed it off, ordered another drink, and spent the rest of the evening basking in compliments and fake smiles. But the universe never forgets the energy we put into it. Days later, Marcus's business began to suffer inexplicable setbacks. A deal fell through. A key partner pulled out without warning. A trusted employee suddenly quit, citing emotional abuse. Marcus didn't connect the dots. He blamed bad luck, then the markets, then betrayal. His temper grew worse, but karma wasn't done. One evening, Marcus returned home to find his 8-year-old daughter, Ilara, hiding in her room. She had been growing quieter, more withdrawn and more fearful each day. She no longer ran into his arms when he got home. She flinched when he raised his voice, even if it wasn't directed at her. That night, she whispered to her mother, "I don't want to make Daddy upset. I want him to love me again." Marcus overheard it. It hit him harder than any lawsuit, any financial loss. His wife, Evelyn, finally sat him down. Her voice trembled, not from fear but from heartbreak. "Marcus," she said, "you're not the man I married. You're always angry, always shouting. You've become a storm that never passes." He tried to protest, to say he was stressed, that it wasn't personal, but she stopped him. "It is personal. To Ilara, every time you shout, it feels like she's done something wrong. She's carrying your anger inside her tiny body." And then came the diagnosis. Ilara had developed anxiety-induced sleep paralysis and early signs of depressive dissociation. Conditions rare in children her age, but not impossible. The doctor's words haunted Marcus. "Children absorb the emotional climate of their homes. Her mind is trying to escape something it doesn't know how to confront." Marcus walked out of the clinic in silence. He had lost count of how many people he'd scolded, punished, or humiliated just to feel powerful. But this was different. This was his daughter, the one person who only ever looked at him with love, now terrified of his presence. He drove in silence that night, past the city, past the noise, and somehow, almost without thinking, he ended up outside a small Buddhist monastery on the edge of town. The gate was open. The silence inside felt heavier than any boardroom he'd ever entered. A monk sweeping the path looked up, smiled gently and said, "You seem like a man looking for peace." Marcus didn't respond. He just stared at the calmness of the surroundings, the softness in the monk's eyes, the stillness in the air. It was the exact opposite of everything his life had become. He stayed, just for an hour at first, then a day, then a week. He learned to sit still, to breathe, to observe his thoughts instead of reacting to them. He asked the monk once, "Why do I feel like I'm losing everything?" The monk replied, "Because the version of you that clings to power must dissolve before your true self can rise." That night, Marcus cried for the first time in years, not for business losses, not for reputation, but for the little girl who once held his hand with joy and now avoided his gaze out of fear. He thought of Jonah, the man he had fired, and without hesitation, he picked up his phone. Marcus Lin hadn't dialed a number in years that didn't serve his ambition. But that night, hands trembling, he searched for the man he'd humiliated, Jonah Miller. It took several hours and more humility than Marcus thought he had left. Eventually, he found Jonah working at a roadside flower stall, barely recognizable in an old jacket, hair grayer, eyes sunken from sleepless nights. He stood behind a wooden cart with a sign that read, "Hope Blooms, $5 a bouquet." Marcus stood at a distance, unsure if he even had the right to speak. When Jonah finally looked up, their eyes met. There was a long pause, no words. Then Jonah said quietly, "What do you want?" Marcus lowered his head. "I came to apologize, not just for the way I treated you, but for what it cost your family. I had no right. I didn't know your story, I didn't ask." Jonah looked at him, cold, still. Then he said, "My daughter passed away 2 months after that night." Marcus's knees almost gave out. He whispered, I'm so sorry." "I know," Jonah said, "but apologies don't bring people back." "No," Marcus replied, "but maybe they can bring the living back to life." Jonah said nothing. Marcus reached into his coat and handed him an envelope. "This is for whatever you need. No conditions." Jonah didn't open it. He just nodded once. The silence between them said more than any forgiveness could. Marcus drove home in tears. That night, he sat with his daughter Alara and said something he had never said before. "I'm sorry for being angry." Her small arms wrapped around him, and for the first time in a very long time, she didn't flinch. From that day forward, Marcus changed his definition of power. He no longer raised his voice to be heard. He listened to be changed. Months passed. Marcus began volunteering at the monastery on weekends. He swept the floors, served food, watered the garden. He didn't tell anyone who he was. He didn't need to. There, he wasn't the CEO of Lin Enterprises. He was just a man trying to rebuild the bridge back to his soul. During one Dharma talk, the monk asked, "When fire burns a forest, do the trees grow back angry, or do they rise, knowing that destruction is part of transformation?" Marcus carried those words like a mantra. He stepped back from the company, let his deputy lead, focused on healing, on presence, on fatherhood. But karma, in its mysterious wisdom, still had more to teach him. One evening, as Marcus sat with Alara under a blooming cherry blossom tree, she turned and asked, "Daddy, Do you still get mad at people?" He smiled and said, "Sometimes. But now I try to breathe before I speak." "Why?" "Because when I lose my peace," he said, "I lose you." She hugged him tighter. That night, Marcus made a decision to create a foundation that would support children and families affected by emotional abuse, stress, and trauma, caused not by poverty alone but by anger left unchecked. He named it the Alara Foundation for Peaceful Homes. The message was simple. Nothing in life is worth losing your peace. Not status, not ego, not control. But not everyone accepted his change. A former colleague posted online, "Funny how the same man who once screamed at his staff for breathing too loud is now preaching peace. Hypocrite." The comment went viral. Some agreed, others defended him, but Marcus didn't respond. Instead, he posted one line, "Yes, I was once blind in power. But if we punish those who try to change, who will dare to become better?" This moment became the turning point. A young man messaged him privately. He wrote, "I grew up with an angry father. Your story helped me understand mine. I'm going to talk to him tomorrow. Thank you for showing that healing is possible, even late." Marcus replied, "It's never too late to become the version of yourself your child deserves." Toward the end of the year, Marcus returned to Jonah's flower stall, but it wasn't there. Instead, in its place was a sign. "Thank you for helping me find peace. I'm now working at a children's hospital, teaching art therapy, something my daughter loved, bless you." Jonah Marcus smiled, tears welling in his eyes. He whispered, "Thank you for forgiving me," without saying the words. And as he walked away, cherry blossoms fell around him like silent prayers. Years passed. The world had moved on. But Marcus Lin had not returned to the world in the way he once did. He no longer sought meetings with investors. He now sat with children in meditation circles. He no longer managed quarterly targets. He managed breath. And most importantly, he no longer shouted to be heard. He spoke in silence to be understood. The Alara Foundation had grown far beyond what he imagined. It had become a sanctuary for parents, children, and teachers, those affected by emotional trauma, anxiety, and the wounds of invisible wars fought within homes. Marcus had become a quiet speaker on compassion and mindfulness, but he never framed himself as a guru or teacher. He always began with the same words, "I am not wise. I am just someone who once confused control with love." One day, after a small Dharma talk, an elderly woman approached him. She held a photo of a girl, maybe 6 years old. Her eyes were tired, but kind. She said, "My granddaughter hasn't spoken a word since her father's anger turned violent. We left him 2 years ago, but she still doesn't talk. Your story gave me hope she might again." Marcus knelt before her and said softly, "Don't ask her to speak. Just give her a world so quiet she'll feel safe enough to remember her voice." That moment went viral, unintentionally. Someone in the room had recorded it, the clip of Marcus comforting the woman, with tears in both their eyes, spread across social media. Suddenly, the man once feared for his rage was now recognized for his reclamation of peace. But peace, as always, is tested. One evening, Marcus received a letter. No return address, just 5 handwritten words on the front. "You never knew the truth." Inside was a single sheet, a medical report. It was from Jonah's daughter, Eva. The report showed that her cancer had already metastasized before the night Marcus fired Jonah.
She had been given a 10% chance of survival regardless of financial support. Marcus sat with the paper in his hands for hours. Was it supposed to ease his guilt or deepen his understanding? He wasn't sure, but he knew this.
Intent creates karma, not outcome. He had acted in rage, in ego, in judgment, and even if it hadn't changed the outcome, it had changed who he was. He looked up at the sky and whispered, "Thank you, Eva, not for the truth, but for reminding me that peace must never be built on someone else's suffering." That night, Marcus wrote something in his journal, a truth he had taken years to earn. Anger is not power. Power is watching yourself catch fire and choosing water instead. He closed the book, stood up, and walked outside. Elara, now a teenager, was sitting on the porch reading quietly. He sat beside her. They watched the stars for a while. Then she asked, "Do you ever miss the old version of yourself?" Marcus smiled gently. "Number. But I remember him every day, not with shame, not with pride, just as a warning." Elara reached over and took his hand. "Thank you for changing, Dad," she said. He looked at her, eyes warm. "No," he replied. "Thank you for not giving up on me before I became who you deserved." In the final minutes of the video, the narrator's voice can gently shift tone, urging viewers to reflect. Have you ever let a single moment of anger rewrite the entire story of your life? Is it possible that what you're holding on to is holding you back more than you realize? Then pause. If someone ruins your peace, do you have the right to destroy theirs in return? Or is reclaiming your calm the only real victory? Marcus walking through a quiet Zen garden at dawn. He passes a small plaque that reads, "Nothing is worth losing your peace." As he exits the frame, a child runs past him laughing. He turns and smiles, not because the world changed, but because he did.